Welcome back, everybody. This video is a long overdue BSJ hero guide on Carry Tiny, a hero that, although recently nerfed, is still very potent in pro level pubs as well as in pro matches, especially in the hands of Team Liquid's own Mickey, who just won the PGL Wallachia LAN and was 6-0 on Carry Tiny. Now, what was really cool about this in terms of making a guide for you guys was that he went a very similar item build every single game, the exact same skill build every single game, and we noticed some reoccurring trends within his gameplay in terms of his approach and timing, something that I think can be easy to emulate and be formulaic for you guys to be able to put into your own games. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So first and foremost, his starting item build pretty much was stat items plus Quelling Blade, as you see here, or it was Wand Triple Branch. It seemed like it was based on the ranged hero offlane. He would not go Quelling Blade because you can usually outlast hit ranged heroes, but against melee heroes, he often went Quelling Blade. He never upgraded a Wraith Band or a Bracer. He would always have starting items. He would fly himself tangos if he went Wand, and then he'd go straight into Treads. That's the most important thing, is Wand into Treads in the laning phase. Now, what's really important to note on his first creep wave, if you watch, is that he's never going to use his tree charges on enemy heroes. He's only going to use them on CSing. The next thing he's always going to do is he's going to toss his tree every single time it's on its last charge. So 4 hits for last hits, toss tree at the end. In this case at the AA, but he did it every single time at either the offlaner or the support. So up until level 2, he has not hit a single enemy hero with a tree charge, but he begins to change that once he's leveled Avalanche. What you're going to see is now that he has Avalanche, he's willing to use his tree to be aggressive because it's really high damage during the duration of a stun. So you're going to see here, Avalanche, hit, toss, and run away. And so he flies himself most often the Belt of Strength first, and you're going to see him often abuse dropping these two items and wanding, and that's going to be Tiny's way of sustaining in the laning phase, especially against a hero like Bristleback that gives you a ton of stick charges, but pretty much every single offlane combo will give you some stick charges. So abusing this mechanic on Tiny seems absolutely essential, especially for his mana pool, and also a hero that, even though he has armor later, does have 0 armor to start the game. So when we look at Mickey's skill build, so his skill build was tree grab into 2 points of Avalanche. There were a few games where he took a second point at tree grab at level 3, but at the end of the day, at level 4, it's 202, and then he maxes out his tree grab first. Then he maxes out Avalanche without a single point in toss, still takes his level 10 talent, the strength talent, before taking toss, and not until level 11 has he leveled toss in any of his games. 6-0, none of his games did he level toss. So in terms of talents, he takes the strength talent, the attack speed talent, the tree grab bonus damage talent, but then the avalanche cooldown talent. Okay, so what he's clearly playing off of is the fact that the avalanche cash range as well as your tree hit are about the same distance. There are times during kill attempts that he will try to combo you in the mid to late game with his toss. But now that the combo of Avalanche Toss doesn't do bonus damage or anything like that, he's not going for like Avalanche Toss combo hit you, right? Burst you down. He's playing off of Avalanche hit in a lot of these fights. So he's still like a pseudo burst damage hero, but he's much more playing on range rather than playing for kills. So the way that we're seeing him play is he'll Avalanche hit them a few times with tree, and then it puts the offlaner in support in situations like this where they're half HP, and that sets up for him to kill them later, as you're going to see here. So it's much more of a war of attrition rather than bursting people down with like kill attempts. As you see, he puts him back down to half with his combo again. And then that's going to set up a kill on Bristleback, especially with a slowing support like Jakiro. The one thing I'm going to notice is once the lane's kind of broken down, notice how he goes Treads. His next item has always been Echo Saber. He's occasionally bought Raindrops in lane if the opponent has an off-lane magic damage nuke that he needs to block. But aside from that, which feeds into the trading sustain game, he just goes straight for Echo Saber. And he's not going to use his tree in lane when he's uncontested. And this is presumably to save the tree charges for either jungle camps or harassing / killing a guy if he does come back. So notice how he's just going to hit the wave forward with regular auto attacks, not like really overly emphasizing, you know, efficiency at this point in the game. He doesn't actually hit Ancients until 12 minutes into the game when he has Echo Saber complete. So it seems like his timing is always around when he gets his Echo Saber. So notice how the second a hero comes back to lane, he grabs his tree ready to fight, right? Playing for denies with his high base damage when the opponent is in lane, playing to push the lane and rotate potentially. Notice how he was looking to rotate when he's already pushed the wave, right? So this is going to set up for him to play around his team. These are all things where he would have otherwise gone to camp and pulled if he wasn't using his tree to push and join the fight. So you're going to notice that he pretty much never leaves top except for to contesting mid runes. We talked about this, that carry players are predominantly rotating through the mid lane. So a lot of them, I know these are pro level pubs, but notice how they're not really playing for these camps because the camps kind of suck. We talked about that. And so the way to play on 7.38 seems to be to play around mid runes, especially at like 10, 12, 14 minutes. And we're going to see nothing different from Mickey than what we've seen in our other carry players. That's now 3 carry players I've watched in depth who do the same thing. So now that he's got his Echo Saber, we're going to see that he goes and farms the Ancients with pushing the wave, using Avalanche to do so. And we're going to see his first farming of the Ancients, which seems pretty efficient overall with the Echo Saber, Avalanche, plus the tree. He manages to clear them. So we're going to see him play for Shadowblade as well as Shard. He will get the Shard right at 15 minutes. That's super important. Notice how he's only going to buy the components of Shadowblade that he can buy while also hitting 1,500 gold at 15 minutes. So he's going to go for the Blitz Knuckles. Keep in mind that for his first 2 neutral items, he took the attack speed bonus on both of them, prioritizing attack speed on a hero with really high base damage. Later on in the game, in all the games that I watched for tier 3 and tier 4, he took the enchantments that gave him either armor or magic resistance depending upon the lineup he was playing against. So in this game, he took armor for both neutral items because he's against Bristleback Ursa. Even like Ember Sleight of Fist is physical. So even though they have a hero like AA, most of the enemy's lineup is physical. So we saw in all of his games that he took either armor or magic resist. So one thing I've noticed in this patch, especially for a hero like Tiny where it's super cookie cutter dry here, is he shows up to pretty much every single fight before 15 minutes, as you see on the clock here. Because he doesn't have Shard yet, he doesn't farm super fast. So unless your hero farms super fast, especially at 15 minutes, because Tiny, it's the Shard timing, it's also the Tormentor timing, it just makes sense if you see a fight brewing to go to it. Every single pub I've been in, even the ones that are like disorganized, right? I feel like people are just fighting nonstop and everyone wants you to be there. So Tiny's the perfect hero for this. Even just tossing out a couple avalanches, great hero to fight at this point in the game, especially in terms of his contribution as a carry. Going to allow him to have a meaningful early game damage contribution. But we're going to see a quick transition in playstyle now that he has his Shard. So once he has his Shard, we see him pretty much play off map exclusively. That's because he doesn't need to show in lanes except for a brief moment sometimes to clear it with like Avalanche plus 1 hit. But now he becomes like an assassin hero playing off map with the Shadowblade. So the Shadowblade Shard not only synergize in regards to some damage and attack speed with the cleave, but also because of the map playstyle that they have. So Tiny's all about the information game. Watch how we're going to fast forward and he's just not going to show in lanes. Like he's just perma off map, farming with the effective battle fury that Tiny has. Finishes his Shadowblade. And the second that he finishes it, we're going to see him setting up a kill on Dyrachyo, the enemy carry, where he's pinging his team, making the call, and he's the initiator. Usually Tiny, because he lacks the burst damage that he used to have, will need a +1 to make these kills work, at least before you get your serious damage items. But every single game, he's done this similar playstyle. Echo Saber, contribute to fights early, gets the Shard, plays off map, gets Shadowblade, goes for a kill. We have a formula throughout the course of the game. The next item he goes has always been BKB or Sanjin Yasha, given predominantly if the opponent has a ton of stuns / magic damage, or they just have like slows and control, but Sanjin Yasha is a bit more of a hybrid item. So in this case, they have a lot of slows and not too many stuns. So he goes for the SNY because the control during the fights is limited. It also accelerates his farm a bit more than a BKB in an ideal scenario. So what I'm noticing about him is that he pretty much plays this area of the map by default on carry, no matter what time in the game it is, as long as he's still farming, which obviously at 22 minutes he still is. And it's just purely about, are enemy heroes coming to his area? If so, he's setting up with his other cores. Was initially looking for a hero here, but then he's just going to take the quick kill, back off, and resume being off map. Really good awareness to TP out there from Mickey. Once again, he's setting up a kill here on an enemy hero. That's how he's kind of playing. He's not like showing in lanes by default. It doesn't always work, right? But you can see that he's constantly on the hunt. Even prioritizes not showing in lane until as long as possible. And notice how he's not trying to walk up and hit towers unless he's got teammates behind him, right? So in this case, he's got some backup. He also sees the Ursa with Aegis in the top lane. Briefly shows on waves, and that's about all you're going to see of him throughout the course of the mid game. So an interesting shout out to the meta of 7.38, and something to consider for you guys. When the opponent has a lot of physical, a super cheap item that also gives 5 all stats for only 1500 gold is Ghost Scepter. It feels like it's the new Glimmer Cape if the opponent's physical damage, which like Ursa, Bristleback, the only way to deal with it for them is an item that costs 3 times as much, which is Nullifier. So I'm seeing a lot of cores go for casual Ghost Scepters, and it only makes sense on Tiny because he did get his armor nerfed on Grow, but also because he's going to spend a lot of the next 10 minutes upgrading the items that he already has in his inventory. So his next items are almost always the Harpoon into Silver Edge. So you're going to see that because he's got like 5,000 gold worth of upgrades to get, that it's okay for him to fill a slot with such a cheap, efficient item, and he can just sell it later once they get the Nullifier, right? Very small investment, forces the opponent to buy a Nullifier in order to burst him. But what I've noticed is even against Bristleback, heroes that have really crucial passives, he almost always goes for Harpoon. It's just like the perfect non-blink item setup for a Tiny in the mid game in order to kill supports. Even though you're not meant to combo Avalanche Toss, at this point in the game, you will usually one-shot supports, especially if they're ranged heroes like Mirana and Ancient Apparition. But after he goes for the Harpoon, the only debate is, does he finish Silver Edge, or does he go for one of the crit items? The 2 crit items are Daedalus, of course, but also the Revenant's Brooch. So it seems like when he wants to go more consistent damage output, he goes for Revenant's Brooch, and it also gives him a bit of a cheaper option, while also considering if he's against like a Terrorblade carry, he'll go for the magic damage route. But if he's going more burst heavy, he's going to go for Daedalus. So I can't emphasize enough that I never see Mickey get initiated onto. He is always off map, playing the information game. Tiny feels really bad at turning a fight, but he is absolutely a menace when he's the one initiating. So you're going to see he gets the Harpoon. Doesn't even need to use it there because of the Shadow Blade. But very straightforward, the combo when we see it. So we'll look for an opportunity where he uses it. So what I like about Mickey's play on the map is that he's always waiting in the midst for the enemy to walk out of position. So he does this so often. We saw with the Ember Spirit in the bottom lane, and then camping on top of hills like this at the new minute mark where the opponent's like gonna go farm. That's what the opponent's thinking. That's he's putting himself in their heads. He's gonna look for Ember first. He sees Mirana, free kill. He's such an opportunistic player, and it's so important when you think of the heroes that he plays, the Tinies, the Nature's Prophet, all about picking the right engagements that they're going to take, and Tiny's perfect for this. So in this game, he does go for the Daedalus because heroes like Ember, Ursa, Ancient Apparition, much more focused on bursting them down as opposed to like taking long sustained fights with the Revenant's Brooch because you're against Ancient Apparition, so you can't sustain anyways. So this is case in point. When Tiny gets initiated onto, he feels really useless. So he has Aegis here, and he is going to get caught in this game. And you're going to see that, like, you kind of just die twice as Tiny most of the time. Sure, you're going to burst them down to half HP with your combo. But if the opponent's allowed to chase you down rather than you being on the offensive, you go from, like, the most powerful, rock-solid hero in the game to just kind of paper, especially against like the magic burst of AA and the physical burst of Ursa. Notice how his neutral item is the damage plus the armor. He did even force BZM to buy a Nullifier. Small little side note there, just because of his Ghost Scepter. The one thing I love about the build that he's concocted with the Ghost Scepter, and obviously you can do this with items like BKB or Satanic, like Dispels or Reset fights, is this is what Tiny loves doing. You're going to notice that he's going to use the Harpoon to close the gap on Dyrachyo, force him to go on him rather than his teammate, and now he just pops Ghost Scepter and resets the fight. So that's an awesome part about Tiny, is despite the fact that he's no longer the same burst hero as he was before, he still does like a large amount of damage in a small period, then wants to reset, play around his low cooldown disables, and burst you again. So the Ghost Scepter reset item makes a lot of sense on the hero, and I love watching that Mickey did this a couple times. So Mickey had several late game builds that he went for. In almost every single game, he ended up with a BKB in his inventory. So in the game we just watched, he finished his BKB, but his last two items are always Swift Blink and Satanic. It just depends on the order in which he buys them, based on does he need the gap close to burst somebody at that stage of the game, or is he more concerned about dispelling and turning the fight with Satanic? Is he fine to get initiated onto? So against the likes of Ursa and AA, he went Swift Blink because he didn't want to get initiated onto, because Satanic doesn't really offer him that potential to turn the fight. But he always ended up with those two items. So once again, the build, Treads, Echo Saber, Shard, Shadow Blade, into SNY or BKB, Harpoon into Daedalus or Revenant's Brooch, and his in-game items were the Swift Blink and Satanic, and he usually buys a BKB if he hadn't already bought one earlier. But yeah, I'm loving watching Mickey play Tiny. He has been an absolute menace in his recent tournaments. Really cool to study the fact that he kind of really drilled out this build, maximized the efficiency. I hope you guys enjoy trying it out in your pubs, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. Peace. Brad G, signing off.